What's up, YouTube? Today I'm going to be making the basic build on this Star-Lord mask. I made a huge mistake in making this, and I glued the mouth on at the wrong angle. Literally halfway through the video, I have to go back and fix it. So sorry about that. There is a basic pattern set for the underlying shape of this, but all these panel pieces and other doodads and things that I glued on, I literally freehanded. So over half this video is just me collecting random junk to make this mask and gluing it all together. This is definitely not like one of my best videos, and I apologize for that. However, the mask is coming out looking pretty awesome. I didn't plan on doing this in 2 parts, but it's already been 2 weeks since I started it, and it took so much longer to get to this point just because I was sick, terribly sick for 7 days, and I'm still just kind of trying to get back to being normal. So part 1 is the basic patterned undershell build, and then all the stuff I put on the outside here. And part 2 will be lenses, LEDs, finishing the eye ports, sealing, sanding, painting, etc., etc. And then the final reveal whenever I try it on to my bald head. I'm going to have to get a toupee or a wig or something to actually fully look like Star-Lord. But yeah, this is a good start, I feel. And yeah, let's just go ahead and jump right on into the build. Okay, so I was hoping to make this as simple as possible, and it's not going to be simple. Okay, so from the patterns here, you're going to need one of each of the front pieces, the face and the mouth, and you're going to need one of the back pieces, which is back 1, back 2, and the back 3 piece. And the only front piece you're going to need 2 of is the front number 2, which is the lower part, which will attach underneath the eye area here. You're going to need 2 of each side piece. So 2 side number 1s, 2 side number 2s, 2 side number 3s, 2 side number 4s, and 2 ear pieces. One of each, one, and then flip your pattern over and do another one. Next, you want to cut all these patterns out and not lose track of them. Alright, so I've put this off to the side for right now. I have started off by cutting out the face pieces. Face 1, or front 1, front 2, which is the lower pieces. 2 number 2s, 1 number 1, and then the actual mouth guard, mouth cover. And you'll notice I've drawn some lines in here, and that was so I could get reference as to where I'm going to put my cut lines. And my cut lines are all the lines here running horizontally. I'm going to go ahead and cut all these in first before heating and shaping this and gluing the rest of it together. Alright, I have cut all of my lines in here, and I used a heat gun to help these lines open up so you can see them. And I also heated the back pretty thoroughly to get this shape into it. And as you're going to notice here, I also put a little bit of curve in this, but these 2 pieces here aren't going to line up, and they're not supposed to, because this is supposed to be setting up off of the face area here. And in order to achieve this, all I did was cut a strip the width that I wanted it sitting off of my face. I just trimmed down the edges. I'm going to go ahead and glue this freehand cut piece here in from edge to edge here, so it will fill up that gap. Right now that I have contact cemented the face pieces together, and I have my spacer piece cut put on here, I'm going to contact cement the edge of the red here to this, and the sides here will be matched up and glued to the edges here. Alright, and here is with all the pieces glued together. And as I said, this side piece here is glued flush, and the top is glued edge to edge. And it doesn't have the exact shape I want yet, but that shape isn't going to fully become realized or get set into place until I have everything glued together. And there is still the top facial piece that goes up here, and I haven't done that yet because I'm going to go ahead and stop here, and I'm going to start working on the side pieces and the rear next. Alright, so setting the front off to the side, what I have here is my 3 back pieces. Now, this one here, I don't need right now, but I did go ahead and cut it out. But I'm going to set it off to the side with the front. Because what this is going to do is once these back pieces are assembled and the side pieces are assembled, this wraps around the back, goes up to the side, and that's what hooks them all together. So this will be used later. So the back 3 piece we don't really need right now. What we do need is the 1 and the 2. And what I'm going to do first is I'm going to contact cement this V gap here together to help add a little bit of curvature to it. And after that, I'm going to heat and put a little curvature to both of these. Alright, so you can see here, with just gluing this V together, it gave it a bit of a curve. It's not perfect, but it's a good start. And to help make the rest of this match up and be more rounded, I'm just going to use a dual temperature Drill Master heat gun. Once you warm up the phone, it becomes pliable, and you can just kind of stretch and tug and push it into shape to however you wish it will look. Just always be careful whenever doing this, because you can melt the foam. Like, the heat gun gets pretty hot. I'm going to go ahead and continue to heat this and curve and work it into shape so that it will match up with my back 1 piece, which I've already taken and heated and shaped and curved. Alright, I got these pieces heated and matched up and glued together. And you're going to notice here that I glued them offset. That is because this piece here, if you look at the photos, is recessed. I'm going to use some 2mm strips of foam down here to fill in, but not right now. Right now I'm going to set the back pieces off to the side with the front piece, and I'm going to go ahead and start working on the ears and the side pieces. Alright, so next I'm moving on to the side here, and I have 2 side 1s, 2 side 3s, and 2 side 2s. I'm going to glue these together first, and side 4 I've set off to the side here. Side 4, front 3, and back 3. Those will be basically connecting everything at the end. And I'm going to go ahead and glue all 3 of these together, but they're once again going to be offset, so I'm going to glue them together and then come back and show you on camera. Okay, so I've glued these together, and that is how 3 goes to side 1, and then side 2 back here, much like with the back piece was recessed, this piece is set down a couple millimeters because I am going to put some 2mm strips over this, much like with the last one. And next what I'm going to do is prep these ears to be glued on. And the ears are going to go here, but they need to sit up off the piece a bit more. And to achieve this, I'm going to do much like I did with the mouthpiece here. I'm going to cut a strip of foam that's going to run all the way around the entirety of this so that it will raise it up. Alright, so here's what I was talking about with the ear pieces. You can see the marker on there, and you'll also notice that I cut through it much like I did on the mouthpiece, and I went ahead and heated this up. This doesn't have much of a shape except for a slight slope inwards at the bottom. That's about it. And whenever I glue this on here, like I say, the top will fit flush, but there's going to be space underneath here. So what I did was I figured out, just by looking at it, where I needed my piece to start, which was pretty much right at this curve, and where I needed my piece to stop at a slope, which was here. And I measured the distance of how wide it needed to be apart from here. Hopefully all that makes sense. What I came up with was another strip that I cut the width of the bottom measurement, or the furthest part from the ear to the side piece, and then I figured out where to cut the angled edges so that it can have a nice smooth slope out from the mask and then slope back in. And I have not glued it on yet, but I wanted to show you. I took my finished earpiece here, and I took the other strip I cut like this, and I used my heat gun and I bent it into shape prior to me gluing it. It'll be much easier to glue if I already have this pretty much in shape. You know, I can work with it a little bit, but if I have to try and go and, you know, work with just a flat piece of foam like this and try to contact cement and get it to stick, it's going to be really hard. Alright, I had to think a while about exactly how to show this guys to you, or show this to you guys out there watching. And I decided it would honestly be easier if I just glued it on and showed you the difference between the glued and the unglued, if that makes any sense. I did put contact cement all along on the blue piece here, down to about here, and on the other blue piece here, and of course all around the edge of the red, because this is going to glue into here. Now you're going to notice whenever you line this up, there's a gap between here and here. You have to pull the foam together to get it to match up and for all this to glue. And what that does is, I'll show you here, you can see it puts the rest of the shape into it. Pulling it around so it fits here correctly gives you the rest of the curvature on the side to match the side of your head. And you can even look at the difference between this. This has got a little bit of curve, but it's really relatively flat. And you look how the extreme curve here is in the front and in the rear on this one from pulling the rest of the pattern around. So if you notice a gap there, there's supposed to be a gap, because whenever you close that gap, it gives your mask the rest of its shape on the side here. Okay, so before I go ahead and start gluing the sides of the front, I want to point out here about this seam that I did. This is barely glued on. I don't know if I mentioned that in the previous clip or not, but I figure I better mention it now. There's literally like an 1/8 inch of contact surface, how much you can see, so it's barely on there. So what I did was I took some hot glue, and on the inside here where you're not going to see it, I just went around to reinforce that to make sure that it doesn't come apart. Alright, now I'm taking my number 3 back piece and I'm going to glue it to the number 2 around this edge here. I'm going to show you that I have heated this and shaped it, and I put a nice curve, a bell curve out, so to speak, and the other end has been slightly curved the opposite way, and I'm going to contact cement these two together. Okay, so I've put piece to piece here and contact cemented this up, and you'll notice yet again I left about a 2mm offset. And once again, to reinforce that, I did use some hot glue, and the offset is because there is going to be those stripe pieces are going to be going up through and down through here. Alright, I've glued on the back piece here, and the easiest way I can say to align this up is where the curves match up here. I did have to do a little bit of trimming. I should mention that, because once I put this curved, heated shape into it, didn't quite match up, so I did trim this a little bit. But right where these curves on this piece and the curve that's the sharpest here between the bottom and the top is pretty much where you want to have it on both sides. Okay, and next what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and contact cement on front 3 top, which is just going to get attached to here. Alright, so I glued on the front piece here, and I did trim a little bit off the edges so you have a bit of a gap. And the reason for this is this number 4, and if you haven't figured it out now, the reason why I number this one 4, because you see 1, 2, 3, seems weird, the order that I glued them. Since this is the last one to be glued, that's why I named it side piece number 4. And this is going to get glued from here to here, and it's going to get glued along this edge down into here, just like that on both sides. Alright, now that all the pieces are together, this is the perfect time to make sure that everything is symmetrical and everything is even and everything is lined up correctly. If you need to make any adjustments, you're going to need to do it now before you start fully heating everything and before you start gluing on all the outer pieces. For example, this side over here was glued down about 4mm lower than it should have been. So I had to cut along this seam and separate the contact cement and then re-contact cement it back together, so that now it is symmetrical and even. And I couldn't quite put my finger on it in the pictures, and it wasn't until I tried it on in the mirror today and was looking at it and I was like, wait a minute,
that's off. So yeah, make sure everything lines up the way you want and is even, etc., etc. Because like I say, from here we're going to start moving on to heating and forming this. A little bit of heating I already did was on the side panels right here to get them to have the indented shape that I want. And I'm just going to go through and look at the reference photo and heat and shape this the rest of the way till I feel happy with it using my dual setting heat gun. Okay, so next part of the process is going to be gluing a lot of weird random odds and ends. There's going to be a lot of freehand stuff done on this, and there's going to be some things that I am going to make patterns for and include in the pattern set. However, I want to point out again, I'm also going to try to remember to mention this in the intro to the video, that, you know, a lot of freehand stuff requires a lot of effort and a lot of things I can't put into a pattern set. And part of the reason for that is, once this is glued together and you start heating it and shaping it, or also consequently, if you need a larger version than this, this is meant to fit my head. My head is 23.5 inches around. That's going from the forehead to the back of my head and back with a measuring tape. Okay, the type of measuring tape that you use for sewing. It's 23.5 inches. So if you have to scale your patterns up, any other additional, like, random little bits and pieces aren't going to fit unless you scale them up. And even then, whenever you start heating things, some things expand, other things shrink. A second layer of patterns may not always add up exactly. So the things that I feel can be adequately patterned from here on out, I will have patterns for. But the things that I don't, I'm going to freehand. And I'm going to try to be as specific as possible, explaining to you what I'm freehanding and what I'm patterning going forward from here. The next thing you're going to need, unless you just want to skip this, is the closest thing I could find to the little... On each side of the Star-Lord mask, there is 3 little tubes, and each tube has kind of an end cap. The closest looking thing I could find to the end caps are these presta valves. And presta is a type of valve that is for a bicycle tube. And the bicycle tubes are mainly, that have presta valves, are mainly for mountain bikes and road bikes. These I got online for about $4 plus shipping. I want to say $6.50 total for a dozen of these. And you're going to need 6 for each side. And where I got these from was on eBay from a company called BCM Plastics, a proud Pittsburgh company. And this is the 12 Presta caps. Like I say, for $6, I don't know how else I could get these pieces unless I 3D printed them. And if I could 3D print the pieces and I had a 3D printer, I'd 3D print the whole thing. Okay, but I'm not. So that's one of the things going forward that you're going to need. Alright, so after gluing and re-gluing this bottom because it was off, looking at the photos and looking at this and looking at the photos and looking at this, I had to make another course correction, which is to add a wedge piece in here, because this sits too angled downward. It needs to be more with the same shape as the face, so I am going to course correct, and I cut up both seams, and I'm going to put this in here. Alright, now that I have added this extra wedge piece here, it looks and feels much better and is much easier to take off and on as well. Sorry, I did not figure that out to begin with, but I did not. Okay, now that I'm done with the initial base pattern and heating, I swear there will be no more random pattern pieces added in out of sync in the video. Of course, this is all kind of the reason why I didn't really want to do this video to begin with, but I always love a challenge, so here we are. Next, what I have here is some 2mm EVA craft foam. And what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to take my heat gun and I'm going to go ahead and put this on high. Okay, and I'm going to do this a few times. And what this will do is it'll actually make the foam thinner. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this into strips. A little bit more than a 1/4 inch wide, but not quite a 1/2 inch. Okay, so I've taken and cut the strips from my EVA foam. And those strips I am then cutting in half to about a 1/4 inch wide. Now they're going to be trimmed and cut as needed for various detail parts. But if you look at your reference photos of the back of the mask, you'll see all these little straight pieces going down and then up on the sides of this as well. And I'm going to start cutting them and gluing them on. And the simplest way to do this is I'm going to take the piece, put it in place where I want it, and once I get it evened out here, I'm going to press it on here to get an impression from this lip. And that impression will then show me where I need to cut it, if that makes sense. I'm going to start trimming, cutting, and gluing all these little strips, and I'll come back and show you the back once I get them all glued on and it's all said and done. Alright, so that's how the back looked. And you know, it's kind of funny, as I was initially thinking about making this stuff. Boy, the front and the sides would be a little tricky, but the back should be easy. Not really. And if you look close in here in the center, you'll notice some blue Sharpie. I did take a Sharpie and draw on some guidelines as to where to glue them. I did not use contact cement on this. What I did use was some super glue to put all these on. And next, I'm going to take some of these same strips and use them to put the curved strips on the side here. And that's for the side too. And notice I wrote slots on there because that's where these slotted pieces are going to go. I'll go ahead and glue those on in a similar fashion, and then I'll come back and do a quick check-in. Alright, now that I have my side pieces and back piece all striped up here, and the other side is done as well, I'm going to go through with my Dremel, and I'm going to sand down and smooth out some of these rough edges where I had to like afterthought trim things so they didn't quite fit right. And I'm also going to angle down this edge here on the earpiece and smooth this out here a little bit, and just kind of go over everything a little bit with the Dremel and help smooth everything out. Alright, so I used a rotary tool. Mine just happens to be a Dremel 4000. I couldn't read on the inside to see exactly what grit it is. It's all blurry on mine, but just one of the wheels that came with the Dremel whenever I purchased it. And if I had to guess by feel, I'd say it's around 150 grit. But I use that to, for example, round off these edges here on the top, and also on this front crest as well, to smooth out the inside of the eyes, and also on the seams here and corners on this mask, and on the top ridge here on the mask, mask mouthpiece, and also just some of these side seams as well. I did a rough sand, the ears, and then up here, blended this in. So yeah, pretty happy so far. And now I'm going to sit down, look at the reference photos, and evaluate just exactly what I'm going to do next. Alright, so next I decided to work on the brow piece here. And for that, what I did was, I didn't actually cut it in this shape. I have a scrap piece here that was extra to show you for an example. I just cut a straight piece, a little bit longer than what I needed. And I did it longer than what I needed because once I put a curve in it, heat it, and so on and so forth, it's going to shrink up a little bit. And that way it will fit up on here nicely when I'm ready to put this on. And what I did was, to show you with the scrap piece for an example, I took a piece of this foam mat here, and I cut a straight edge and on one side and an angled edge in a strip, and I sanded the back side of it. You can see here the texture is very pronounced. Over here on the sanded piece, you can see I've worn it down pretty well. That way it'll glue better and sit more even, for one thing. And also to shave a little bit off of it, because it is really wide. This stuff's at least a solid 10 millimeters. And once I got all my sanding and everything done, mostly by hand, I didn't use a Dremel on this very much. And once I got all my hand sanding done, I used the heat gun and just heated it into the shape that I wanted. Alright, so I took and cut out some pieces here that are going to be the side pieces, which will then match up, of course, with the centerpiece It's going to be going across the brow here. And this was not attached up to this point. I have gone ahead and glued it, and the super glue is finishing its cure and dry right now. And I'm going to go ahead and glue these two side pieces on. But when I do, you'll notice that I've heated these. And you'll notice this curve in the bottom part here. There's going to be a tube coming out of here. So I'm not going to glue this bottom part down just yet. I'm going to put the adhesive from the top here down to about right here. And then I'm just going to stop right where that bend is and right where the curve starts to come out. I'm going to glue both side pieces on and the center brow piece that I ground out as well. And now that I have all three pieces glued on here, there is a little Dremel work I am going to do with kind of smoothing this down a little bit and evening it out so it's not such a sharp corner there, making it a little bit less aggressive, fading out of the brow. And yeah, pretty stoked so far. It doesn't look too bad. It's starting to finally come together. And as it does, I am of course feeling more and more confident about it. Okay, so the next thing I have here is some pieces of rubber tubing. I did not buy these. This came off of, this is the tubing from a home insecticide spray. It had a bottle with a tube that ran out of it up to an actual like hand actuated spray nozzle. Here is some other rubber tubing pieces, and this here is slightly larger than the other. And the first larger segment is going to be glued up inside this area here that's curved on the eye side piece, the one that I didn't glue last night. It's going to be glued up in there, and it's going to be connected to this as well with some glue. And this of course will come down and be the L-shaped piece that comes out of here and down the front of the mask. But I want to point out what I've already started to work with here is, you'll notice the one on this side here is a little bit thicker than the other one, and that's because it's not a straight segmented from one to the next. It tapers and angles down somewhat. So I've been aggressively heating this, which is causing the rubber to harden a little bit, and I've been sanding it down to an angle so it looks more like the one from the movie. That's maybe a little bit obsessive, but yeah, sorry, I didn't buy these. And a lot of the stuff on this mask, like I also have a piece of pipe here that I'm going to use for the side thing. I'm going to cut it down. This came from an old Christmas decoration. I scavenge a lot of things because constantly doing builds like this and making several videos a month is really expensive. This tubing is about 7/8 inch. It's a little bit less than an inch straight across from side to side. Diameter, circumference. You know what I mean. Point is, sorry, I don't have sizes or measurements for this. I'm just scavenging stuff. And realistically, you know, if your head is the same size as mine and you're using the pattern set to make the base shell the same as I made this, it's going to fit a 23.5 inch head. So sizing on the pipe and things like that don't matter a whole lot, because if you make a larger Star-Lord mask, you have to upsize your basic pattern pieces because you have a larger head. Or let's say you're making this for a son, or you just have a really tiny head, I don't know, you make this smaller, you're going to want a different size pipe. You're going to want something a little larger or a little bit smaller. So keep that in mind as far as some of this stuff. Sizes will change. You're going to have to look at reference photos and use your best judgment, you know, to make the most awesome looking Star-Lord mask that you can make. But if you're making the same size as me, this is about 7/8 inch. Well, correction. If you're making the same size shell as me, and you happen to like the way mine is looking, and you don't want to change this, 7/8. Alright, so using, once again, some super glue, I am still bypassing the contact cement for right now. Part of that is, super glue gives you a pretty stiff bond. Part of what super glue does, it makes a chemical reaction, a chemical burn essentially, and whenever it sears and glues things to the foam, it creates a pretty stiff, pretty solid bond, which is kind of the opposite of, say, something like contact cement. Contact cement's great for things that are flexible. Well, I don't want this flexing or moving around or doing anything, none of this stuff. So I glued this all on just using super glue and eyeing it up and getting it in place. And yeah, pretty happy with the way that turned out. I did, of course, again, use some heat. You can see there's a little scorching on here. I got it pretty hot to put the bends in here so that they stay. And as you notice, there's a piece that comes out of the earpiece here that goes around. I was going to use tubing. I'm actually considering using some sort of heavy gauge steel rod of some sort of like a welding rod, but a little thicker. I actually happen to have something that I scavenged that I'm going to possibly use, but I want to use something like that so it doesn't flex or bend in the slightest like this rubber tubing here does. And next what I'm going to start working on is I'm going to take those presta valve caps that I bought. I'm going to start prepping them to be put into this area over in here. Alright, you can see I have all these little presta valves, and they've all essentially been halved. And over here is some of the pieces I cut in half that didn't work out so well. And I got 12 of them, pretty much for that purpose. I still have 4 left. And how I cut them was, I put them in between scissors with the cap facing this way. And once it's in place like this, you want to make sure your fingers are clear of this. Make sure that your fingers are clear of the scissors. And then just go ahead and gently but firmly apply pressure until you cut through. And then if you need to, on a couple of these I had to take some sandpaper and just sand them down a little bit to even them out, because I mean, you're just rough cutting them with some scissors. It's not going to be exact. But these ones here I got lined up as well as possible. And I'm going to go ahead and, if you look at the reference photo, you'll notice that there is 6 on each side with what looks kind of like a filter or something. I don't know. It looks like a textured tube essentially running between each pair. So I'm going to go ahead and scrounge around and find some stuff for that, and then we'll come back and see what I've done. Alright, and just so I don't lose my little cut up valve caps here, I put them in a bag. And what I found digging around is some paracord. It has a nice texture to it. I'll be able to glue it and stretch it and cut it and lay it flat in between these so that I can put them onto the individual panels and glue them on. But first what I did was I took my side one piece and I traced it out onto some 2mm craft foam, and I drew a little extra blob on it, and then I trimmed that down so that this side panel will fit in here alongside the eye and up over here perfectly, just like in the reference photo. I decided to do this first before putting these on, just so I'd have like a guide and an idea as to where to put them, if that makes any sense whatsoever. And since I did have to do so much custom cutting and trimming on this, this won't be included in with the pattern photos on Facebook or the purchasable patterns on Etsy. But like I say, depending on how yours is heated and curved and shaped, you're probably just going to have to do the same thing as I did, the side one, and then leave some excess and trim it down to fit. I'm going to go ahead and glue these on, then I'll hop right back to finishing my little side pieces. Alright, so I got my green side pieces glued on, and I decided to go ahead and put the accent pieces here as well. And I just took out my front 3 pattern again and use that as a guideline. And then of course I had to freehand cut both this curve and this curve gradually until both pieces fit and the angles and all that was correct. And with each new piece, this is getting closer and closer to looking like Star-Lord. Since I was doing the other panels, I figured I might as well just go ahead and do another back number 3. And this time I traced it out onto some 2mm craft foam. And I had to extend it a little bit, so I had some extra to trim off so it would match up nice and even. And I also trimmed off some of my excess on the top to maintain my shape. And now goes from one side to the other. And this seam I'm not going to silicone over. I'm going to leave that in because that is a seam on the mask itself. Okay, since I've added on this back wraparound piece, I've also gone through and cut a new mouthpiece. I just didn't like the angles and the other cuts, so I did a new one. And I also put this strip here And I also took the X-Acto knife and cut some of the detail lines in around the eye ports and things like that. Next, I'm going to take some more 2mm foam and make a couple side plates that are going to start where the small hose goes into the big hose, and it's going to go straight down the side here. Right, I put side plate in I just mentioned on either side of the tubes here. Then I put another flat plate or panel or whatever you want to call it. I just kind of freehand cut beside it. Also took my heat gun and heated this area up a little bit right in here just to get this as level as possible, because that's where I'm going to be gluing on my 3 weird apparati that I'm going to make out of paracord and the valve, the presta valve caps. Those are going to go 1, 2, and 3 right in this area. If you look over here, I did take my X-Acto knife once again, and I did a little bit more of that detail cutting on either side. I didn't have to do it right now, but I thought it would be a little easier to do the detail cutting now before I end up gluing those things in, having to worry about just bumping into them with the X-Acto knife or whatever. And it also kind of helps to give me, as an example, the space that I have to work with and the lengths I'm going to have to work with to make these 3 pieces fit on either side. And then once that's done, we can finally move on to the monstrosity of gluing all those tubes, and I have to make a pattern for the front piece and so on and so forth. Alright, and here's a little piece I've come up with. I tried super glue and it didn't really work with the paracord on the plastic, so I ended up using hot glue, which was kind of a horrifying, nasty mess that is now, I get the camera in focus here, stuck all over my fingers, and this finger in particular is burnt pretty bad underneath all this white crap. It's sending pain up my finger, up my arm, into my brain. So be really careful when you're doing this part, or just find a better way. Maybe I should have just tried contact cement. I don't know. I am going to use contact cement to glue these onto the mask here. But yeah, if you can find an alternative way to do this, or just not use hot glue, or be very careful, or obviously more careful than I was. Alrighty, I got all 3 of my pieces glued on here. And to glue them on, I use some contact cement. You can see here that pretty straight and even. And I achieved this by simply drawing in place where I wanted them with a Sharpie. And I'm going to take my contact cement and go ahead and glue on the other 3 that I have. Okay, so I use my ear cover pattern to cut out 2 more from EVA foam, just because I felt like it didn't quite stick out enough. And I went through with my Dremel and sanded and evened out all the layers and rounded the edges a bit, and also did that everywhere else on the mask that I hadn't done, a few spots that I missed, just to make sure I got everything. Also rounded this edge up here. That'll help make it look less like foam, something more like something's been manufactured. And the next part of the process, of course, is going to be making the piece for the mouth here, which I will probably have a pattern for that, just because I'm going to have to pattern that out to get it exactly right. And I think that using a pattern at home, you can make it a little bigger or a little smaller depending on the size of your mask, and use that pretty reasonably. The next thing you're going to need is some tubing. This tubing is about 1 inch across, and this is not PVC pipe. This is actually from some old Christmas decoration, because I am flat broke, as I've stated previously in this video, and I am scavenging a lot of things. And I cut 2 equal lengths, and I cut them using a hacksaw. And of course they weren't quite even, so I had to sand them and Dremel them and get them so that the 2 were both the same length, etc., etc. And where these are going to fit on the mask is going to be, you're going to want the corner a little bit below your cap here, with the front stopping right wherever you're going to have your main grill stop and that bottom extension come out. So that's how I figured out the length, pretty much just by eyeballing it. So I don't have an exact length on that, since the size and shape of your mask and your tubing is going to determine all that. One thing I will say about this scavenge pipe is it's not very strong, but it's extremely light. It weighs nothing, much less than PVC. So that'll help some shave some weight off the overall mask, and that's pretty awesome. Alright, so I took my tubes here and I cut out a strip of 5mm foam and then clipped the ends. And I took that piece and I traced out an identical one for the other side. I cut some detail lines in it and put some holes in it and heated it to shape. And then I used super glue to glue the foam to the plastic itself. And one of the things I want to point out here, anytime I'm going to glue plastic, I always take, and I don't know if you can see this in the camera, but I took and I sanded the area that I'm going to have adhesive on. It'll help it stick better to the plastic than, the smooth finish that you have on the rest of the piece here, if this will ever come into focus. Okay. There you can see smooth, and hopefully if the light catches it, you can see that I've sanded this up here. In fact, there's still a little bit of particles on it, but yeah, that'll help your glue stick better. I do this anytime I'm going to glue foam to plastic, or if I'm going to use super glue to glue plastic to plastic, because it's pretty hard to get a lot of mold injected plastics to stick together. Alright, so I used some contact cement to glue on some strips of 2mm foam here, and then I traced around it and cut out a circle and just super glued that inside. That'll make the end cap, which is where your little tube or wire or whatever you want to call it is going to come out and connect behind the ear. And up front here, I went to the plumbing section at Lowe's, and they had a bunch of O-rings and stuff up on the wall, and I ended up finding these, and they were too big, so I had to cut a section out of them, and I contact cemented this around it, and I put a little hot glue on the back side of it here, where you're not going to see it, just to help reinforce it to make sure that it doesn't pop off. And yeah, this is starting to slowly come together. Next, I'm going to use some window screen and some foam and some other things to cover up this hole here, which is where the tubes are going to come out and connect here in the front. Alright, I've glued my two pieces here, my two tubes, onto the front of the Star-Lord mask. And I finished these ends here. I know I just said in the previous clip I was going to use window screen, and I was, but much like every part of this mask, I sit here and obsess over every tiny little detail, which is what's taken so long to make this. I mean, this obsession has led to something that is definitely not even slightly screen accurate, but it's pretty cool, and is handmade, so I'll give myself that. But what I used for texture instead of the window screen was I had an old backpack, and it has this type of synthetic fabric on it, and if you look at the photos, it looks like a weaved fabric, or a weaved steel grid or something. Weaved steel fibers, I don't know. I have no idea what it's supposed to be. But that was the closest thing I had that matched that. And a nice thing about this synthetic fabric is that it glues really well to foam or itself or other things with super glue. And most fabric does not. Like actual natural fabrics like cotton, I usually have a pretty hard time getting to glue unless I use a lot of it and end up gluing my fingers together and all this other stuff. But this synthetic fabric worked really well just to put in there, and also since you can super glue things to it, it'll be easy to put in the two tubes that are going to come out into the centerpiece that I'm currently working on. So I'm going to go ahead and finish the centerpiece and then come back and show you guys what I did with that. Alright, so I made the front piece here, and it's pretty straightforward design. There's just two V-cuts on either side that I sanded out with a Dremel. If I can get this camera to focus. V-cuts are on either side, and yeah, I'll include that as a pattern piece. You could leave the center in and just do some cuts with an X-Acto knife, or you can cut the center out. I decided to just cut the center out and make it recessed. And I took some of the same scavenged rubber tubing that I had, and I'm using it, the same stuff I had here, the smaller. I'm going to use this to glue into here. Alright, I got both rubber tubes glued on. It was quite a feat, I'm not going to lie, and a bit of a challenge to get them glued in, not down to like the millimeter or the centimeter, but it's pretty close. And the bends as well wasn't very easy to attain that. You'd think it would be, but actually it was a little complicated. And I glued both of these on using super glue. And I also want to point out that I did use some hot glue just to kind of reinforce both of these tubes here on either side. Down in here where you're not going to see it, and same thing to reinforce the front. I just poured some down into the back side of this little mouth guard here to make it a little bit more firm, because it is just 3mm EVA foam with a piece of 2mm glued offset behind it. Okay, so the next thing I did was I put in this steel rod here. Now I can't tell you what gauge this is or where to get it because I didn't buy it. Like most of the things on this particular mask, like these tubes for example, or like the white tubes on the side here, I scavenge all this stuff. Like, yeah, I bought the foam, yeah, I bought the valve caps or whatever. But as far as like this, I just scavenged this. But what it actually came from was this structure here. You'll notice the sides have this nice bend. This is actually from a turkey pan from Thanksgiving. Yes, I am serious. No, I'm not joking. This is from a turkey pan. There were just two angled pieces like this. I cut them off. And this, of course, is not glued in here yet. I just kind of popped a hole here and popped a hole down here and just kind of have it sitting there for right now. I will glue it in later, but there's some things I have to put on the bend, and I also have to check the angle of the bend. And there's also kind of an angled piece that comes off onto this I have to make, and there's just a few other things I have to do. Now, this isn't as thick as I'd like it to be, but considering the fact that I don't have any budget for this project, aside from the foam and the already stuff that I've spent, plus I still have to go find synthetic red dye to dye the lenses, because I doubt I'm going to find red lenses somewhere inexpensive, but that's a whole different matter. But for right now, that was the quickest and easiest solve for that problem. And the nice thing about it is that since this is a manufactured bend in this rod, both of them are pretty much identical. Like down to like the smallest measurement, they're really close to one another. So I don't have to worry about me like trying to manipulate or bend something like I already had to do with both of these hoses up front and these other two smaller hoses here. It's already done for me. So, like I say, that's not really something you watching this say, oh, I happen to have that. You probably won't. But, you know, this is just to give you an example of improvisation and scrounging up stuff. Like, unless you have, you know, a decent budget at your disposal, cosplay is expensive, like really expensive. And it's not even that everything, you know, like the foam doesn't cost a lot, the glue doesn't cost a lot. When you start adding all this stuff, foams, glues, etc., it becomes a lot of money. And yeah, but I don't think it looks too bad. Probably gonna have to use some hot glue or something to hold this in. I don't think that maybe super glue will work. I'll try some super glue first. But yeah, that's where I'm at right here. I'm going to do both of those. And like I say, I'm sorry I'm doing so much stuff off camera, but this is a really slow project. Okay, so I found some more scrap tubing lying around, and I put this clear scrap tubing over top of my inner metal wire. And then to get these little corner joint pieces, I just cut out some strips of EVA foam and super glued them to it, and cut out another strip and glued it here. And that's pretty much going to be that for both sides, so that it's all joined and comes up into here. And the inside here, where I poked it through, you kind of can't really see it. Let me see if I can get this into the light and into focus. It's totally not focusing. There we go. I don't know if you can totally see that, but the steel rod is poking through. Okay, I think you can maybe see it a little bit better. Yeah, over here you can see it's poking through. You don't want that to poke you, obviously. It is super glued in place, but it's just not safe to have that sticking out. So you're going to need to cover that. And what I'm going to use to cover it is some good old hot glue. Okay, so this is pretty much going to conclude part 1 of the Star-Lord mask. I didn't intend upon doing this
in two parts, like I mentioned in the opening, but like I say, that 7 days of flu just wiped me out. And also the complications with the lenses as well. I tried dyeing some, but it's just not working. So I actually ordered some. So part 2 will be lenses and the extended ports that are going to go around the eyes here. And also I'm going to put some LEDs on the inside, on either side of the eye ports, so that there'll be light shining outwards. And I'll also have to finish sealing and sanding and primering and painting this as well, that we all can see the finished product. But I feel like I got pretty far. But 2 weeks is just so long for me to work on a project and not have a video up on the channel. So, you know, as always, thanks to you guys for subscribing and watching. If you enjoyed this video and you're not a subscriber, please leave a like and subscribe. It does help me out an awful lot. And as always, I hope you guys have a great day, and thanks for watching.